You know that one friend who swears something unexplainably creepy happened to them as a kid? Turns out an entire country has that friend. Japan has spent the last few centuries and the last 25 years of the internet quietly building the most elaborate shared universe of ghosts, monsters, and don't go in that bathroom alone folklore on Earth. Today we're counting down 16 of the most famous ones. Fair warning, by the end of this, you will not want to be the last one in a public restroom, and you will definitely think twice about rice fields. Quick note before we get into it, everything in this video is pulled together from a bunch of different sources online, because my search history now looks like I'm building a shrine to a slit-mouthed woman. So if anything's off or needs a correction, drop it in the comments below. I promise I won't take it personally. Alright, let's get into it. Japan calls these stories Toshi Densetsu, urban legends, and a surprising number of them started as actual, documented social panics, not just campfire tales. Let's start with the one that arguably kicked off the whole modern wave. 1. Kuchisake-onna, the slit-mouthed woman. Late 1978, Gifu Prefecture. A rumor starts among school kids about a tall woman in a surgical mask who stops you and asks one question, "Am I pretty?" There is no correct answer. Say no, she kills you. Say yes, she pulls down the mask to reveal a mouth slit ear to ear and asks again. Say no now, still dead. Say yes, and depending on the version, she kills you anyway or cuts your mouth to match hers. By spring 1979, this had genuinely exploded nationwide. Newspapers covered it, teachers walked kids home in groups, and police in several cities increased patrols looking for a woman matching the description, because enough calls came in that they couldn't ignore it. In one wild twist, police in Himeji arrested a 25-year-old woman in summer 1979 for dressing up as Kuchisake-onna and walking around with a knife, Japan's least career-advancing prank. The panic died down when summer vacation broke the rumor chain, but the character never left, and some folklorists trace her further back, to Edo period tales of shape-shifting fox spirits with unnervingly wide mouths. So the new 1979 legend might just be a very old fear wearing a new mask. 2. Toire no Hanako-san. Hanako of the toilet. If Kuchisake-onna taught kids to fear the street, Hanako-san taught them to fear the school bathroom, specifically the third stall, third floor. Her legend traces to the 1950s but exploded in the 80s and 90s occult boom to the point where nearly every school developed its own version. Nobody agrees how she died. A World War II air raid, a stranger, bullying-driven suicide, and that disagreement somehow makes it worse. The summon ritual. Knock 3 times on the third stall. Ask, "Are you there, Hanako-san?" Mild versions get a small voice answering yes. Darker versions get a bloody hand or get dragged straight into the bowl. Some regional versions have her turning into a 3-headed lizard. I don't make the rules. Modern pop culture, like the manga toilet-bound Hanako-kun, has since reimagined her as mischievous but protective. Character development, truly. 3. Manto, the red cape, staying in the bathroom. Sorry, the folklore picked the theme. Not me. Manto may actually predate Hanako-san, with some accounts tracing him to the 1930s. You're in the last stall, and a voice asks, "Red paper or blue paper?" Some versions swap in red cloak or blue cloak. Pick red. You're slashed until your clothes are soaked in your own blood. Pick blue. You're strangled until your face turns blue. No safe answer. Only refusing to answer. Or running. His backstory varies wildly. A handsome young man who wore a mask to avoid admirers, spiraling into murder, or a modern face on much older beliefs about a toilet deity called Kawayagami, which Japan genuinely used to worship. Centuries of real folk religion, filtered through decades of unhinged schoolyard retelling. 4. Teke Kashima Reiko. This is the reason I will never stand too close to a train platform edge again. A young woman falls, or is pushed, onto railway tracks in northern Japan and is cut in half by a train. She doesn't die instantly. She survives just long enough to drag her upper body along using her hands or elbows, scraping the pavement with a sound that gives her the name. Teke. As a spirit, she keeps making that sound while chasing victims, cutting them in half in turn, often with a scythe. Some versions name her Kashima Reiko, and the 2 stories are told together, so often people argue over which came first. Some say learning her name means she'll come for you within 3 days, unless you answer her questions about her missing legs correctly. What's genuinely interesting is there's 0 confirmed real-world source, no verified accident, no named station. It's a floating legend, a raw visceral fear of trains and being chased, landing on whatever local variation feels most plausible. 5. Mary-san no Denwa, Mary's phone call. A girl's family is moving. In the chaos, she loses or throws out an old Western-style doll she'd named Mary. That night, the phone rings. A high doll-like voice says, "Hi, it's Mary. I'm at the garbage dump now." She hangs up. It rings again. "I'm at the corner store now." It rings a third time. "I'm in front of your house now." She works up the courage to open the door. Nobody's there. The story ends, depending who's telling it, with the line, "I'm right behind you now," and lets your imagination do the rest. The doll's foreign name is deliberate. One popular theory ties the story to a real well-known Yokohama street figure, nicknamed Yokohama Mary, an elderly woman known for painting her face white and dressing like a living doll. The dread mechanic here, the caller announcing she's closer and closer and closer, is basically a phone-based ancestor of every "the call is coming from inside the house" story since. 6. The Okiku Doll. Here's where things shift from story you're told to object you can go look at, which is somehow worse. In 1918, a teenage boy named Eikichi Suzuki bought a traditional doll in Sapporo for his young sister, Kikuko, or Okiku, depending on the account. She adored it, slept with it, and then, not long after, died of illness. Grieving, the family kept the doll on their household altar. And then they noticed something. The doll's hair, originally short, was getting longer. They took it as a sign her spirit had settled into the doll and kept it, watching the hair grow for 2 decades. In 1938, relocating, they handed it to Monenji Temple in Hokkaido, where monks have cared for it and periodically trimmed its ever-growing hair ever since. It's still there today. You can visit, you cannot photograph it, which somehow makes it creepier than if you could. 7. Yuki-onna, the Snow Woman. Time for a change of pace. This one's actually old. Yuki-onna appears in writing as far back as the Muromachi period, when a monk named Sogi described encountering a tall, beautiful woman with skin white as snow while stepping outside on a snowy morning. She's a mountain pass spirit, gorgeous, silent, and ruthless, appearing to travelers lost in blizzards. In some regions, she simply freezes people with an icy breath, leaving frost-coated corpses. In others, she talks with you first, and if you disappoint her or ignore her, the ending gets worse. One especially well-known version has her sparing a young man on the condition he never speaks of the encounter, and years later, he marries a mysterious pale woman, has children with her, and only realizes who she really is the moment he breaks his promise. She's not purely a monster in every telling. Some regions describe her as tragic, even worshipped as a seasonal deity who arrives with the new year. Beauty and danger tangled together, which is basically the whole point of a yokai. 8. Jorogumo, the Spider Woman. Jorogumo's origin story is delightfully specific. In Japanese folklore, when a golden orb weaver spider, a real species that actually lives in Japan, reaches 400 years old, it gains the power to shapeshift into a beautiful woman. She then uses that beauty to lure men toward remote waterfalls, caves, and pools, where she traps them in silk and feeds on them. Her human disguise slipping only in reflections. One classic version, tied to a real waterfall in Izu, tells of a man resting nearby whose legs get bound by an enormous number of spider threads he can't explain. Another has a lumberjack falling in love with a mysterious young woman who returned an axe he dropped in the water and who is never seen again after their wedding, presumably because he found out what she actually was. Her name literally translates to something like entangling bride, which is either a lovely turn of phrase or a genuinely upsetting one, depending how the date's going. 9. Gozu, the cowhead. Here's where the list gets meta. Gozu, or cowhead, is a Japanese legend about a legend, a short horror story, supposedly discovered in the 17th century, said to be so terrifying that anyone who heard it in full either went mad or died of fright. According to the rumor, existing copies were deliberately destroyed, and the few fragments that survived were cut apart and scattered, so no single person could ever assemble the whole thing again. Naturally, nobody has ever actually produced the complete story, which is sort of the entire joke and the entire horror at once. One folklorist theory connects it to a real, genuinely secretive rain-making ritual practiced in parts of Western Japan, involving the sacrifice of a bull and its head thrown into water, a taboo so strict that even discussing the ritual was forbidden. If that's right, you must not speak of the ritual may have slowly warped over generations into you must not tell the story. Folk memory doing what folk memory does best, mutating a real taboo into an impossible one. 10. Tomino no Jigoku, Tomino's Hell. Sticking with things you should not say out loud. In 1919, poet Saijo Yaso published a genuinely disturbing poem about a person named Tomino descending through the various levels of Buddhist hell, written in vivid, nightmarish imagery. On its own, that's just unsettling literature. The urban legend part came decades later, claiming that reading the poem aloud, not silently aloud, brings misfortune, injury, or death to the reader. The rumor reportedly picked up steam after a filmmaker who'd adapted the poem died years later, and after vague stories of an unnamed university student circulated online. Never mind that the poem's actual author lived to 78, presumably having read his own work aloud at some point in 5 decades. The legend really took off on Japanese internet forums in the 2000s, where people started filming themselves reading it as a dare, some posting proof nothing happened, others simply never posting again, which, statistically, probably just means they lost interest. Probably. 11. Kokkuri-san. Time for the one legend on this list you can actually participate in if you've got questionable judgment and a spare 10-yen coin. Kokkuri-san traces to the 1880s, when Western spiritualist crazes like table-turning and the newly invented Ouija board reached Japan. The adapted version uses a homemade paperboard, with players resting a finger on a coin and asking questions while it moves to spell out answers. The entity supposedly summoned is imagined as a composite spirit, part fox, part tanuki, part dog, borrowed from older shapeshifter folklore. It became a massive schoolyard craze from the 1970s onward and is still played today. Here's the twist. This is one of the rare cases with a well-documented mundane explanation sitting right beside the scary one. The ideomotor effect, the same phenomenon behind Ouija boards, where your hand makes tiny movements you genuinely don't feel yourself making. Japanese folklorists were debunking it as early as the Meiji era. Hasn't stopped generations of terrified kids from refusing to end the ritual properly, just in case. 12. Hitori Kakurenbo, hide and seek alone. If Kokkuri-san is the fun ritual game on this list, this is very much not that. Instructions for playing hide and seek by yourself first appeared on Japanese occult message boards around 2006-2007, and they're disturbingly specific. Hollow out a stuffed animal, refill it with rice, sew it shut with red thread, and give it a name that isn't yours. At a set hour, alone in your house, you stab the doll with a knife while naming yourself as the seeker, then hide, holding a mouthful of salt water the entire time, which you're not allowed to spit out no matter what you hear or feel. You're meant to search for the doll again after a set time, find it moved from where you left it, spit the salt water on it, and declare victory 3 times. Then burn it. The instructions come with real warnings from people who tried it. Pets behaving strangely, objects moved, footsteps in an empty house, which is either genuinely paranormal or exactly what happens when you deliberately spook yourself alone at 3 a.m. holding a knife and a mouthful of salt water. Either way, I'm not trying it, and I'd gently suggest you don't either. 13. Inunaki Village. In 1999, Japanese TV station Nippon TV received an anonymous letter titled "The Village in Japan That Isn't Japan," describing a settlement in Fukuoka Prefecture whose residents supposedly rejected the Japanese constitution entirely, with a handwritten sign at the entrance to prove it. The oldest version of the story follows a young couple whose car breaks down near a mountain tunnel in the early 1970s. They wander into what looks like an abandoned village and are murdered by a resident with a sickle. A second, equally charming version involves a phone booth near the tunnel that supposedly rings every night with a call from the village itself. Answer it, and you're cursed and transported there. The eerie part is that a real Inunaki village did exist, founded in the 1690s, later flooded when a dam was built in the 20th century, leaving the old tunnel abandoned. So this is a case where a genuinely defunct, half-submerged real place got fused with an entirely modern, internet-born horror story until it's hard to tell where the documented history ends and the legend begins. 14. Kisaragi Station. On January 8, 2004, a user called Hasumi posted on 2 channels saying something felt wrong. Her usual 5 to 8 minute commuter train in Shizuoka had been running for 20 minutes without stopping, and every other passenger was asleep. What followed was a real-time thread. Hasumi kept posting updates. Other users replied with advice, growing increasingly alarmed. Eventually, the train stopped at a station called Kisaragi, a name nobody recognized and which appeared on no map. She got off. Nothing around but fields and a strange rhythmic drumming in the distance. A man offered her a ride to the nearest station. The forum, watching live, told her not to get in. She got in anyway. Her post got shorter, then stranger, then, around 3:45 a.m., stopped entirely. No resolution was ever posted. The thread just ends. That unresolved, real-time format is exactly why it stuck around for 2 decades. It doesn't read like a ghost story. It reads like a transcript of something that happened to someone live, in front of an audience that could only watch. 15. Kunekune, the Wriggling thing, first posted on 2 channel around 2003. In a thread for scary stories that aren't funny, a man recalls his older brother visiting the countryside, spotting a strange white humanoid shape wriggling in a distant rice field on a hot summer day. Curious, the brother grabs binoculars for a closer look, and the moment he understands what he's seeing, he goes pale, breaks into a cold sweat, and collapses, muttering that it's better not to know. He never recovers. He spends the rest of his life laughing and endlessly mimicking the creature's twisting motion. The horror here isn't physical at all. Nobody ever describes what the Kunekune actually is. Only that understanding it breaks you. Some blame the whole legend on heat-hazed scarecrows or a very human reaction to heat stroke and dehydration in a Japanese summer field. Either way, if you're ever out in rural Japan in August and something white is wriggling in the distance, maybe just don't reach for the binoculars. 16. Hachishaku-sama, and we're closing on the one that, out of everything researched here, I'd least want to actually encounter. Born on 2 channel on August 26, 2008 in a single post, a teenager staying at his grandparents' rural farmhouse hears a low mechanical sound, "Poke, poke," drifting over the garden hedge, and looks up to see the crown of a woman's wide-brimmed hat moving above it at a height that makes no sense, until she passes a gap and he sees all of her, roughly 8 feet tall, white dress, that sound coming from somewhere around her. When he mentions it casually to his grandparents, their reaction is immediate, genuine terror. According to the legend, if she takes an interest in someone, especially a child, she'll find a way to lure them off, sometimes mimicking a trusted voice, and if she succeeds, they vanish within days. Villagers place protective Jizo statues along the roads to limit where she can travel. What makes this one land differently from everything else on this list is how documented its birth is. We know the exact date, the exact forum, arguably the exact original post. It's less ancient folklore and more modern folklore being born in real time, and we happened to be watching. Which might be the most unsettling thing on the entire list. These stories aren't done being made. What gets me about all 16 of these isn't any single detail, it's the pattern. Every generation in Japan seems to invent its own version of the same handful of fears. Strangers who ask questions with no safe answer. In the tsunas, moments of being briefly alone and vulnerable, objects and rituals that blur the line between play and something real. The costumes change. A masked woman in the 70s, an 8-foot figure on a message board in the 2000s, but the shape of the fear barely moves. And honestly, we could have kept going. Japan has a whole extra tier of these. The human-faced dog Jin Menken, the gap-dwelling Sukuma-onna, the phone-summoned Satoru-kun, the cursed animation known as the Red Room, the elevator game that supposedly takes you to another building entirely. We just didn't have room for all of them today. If one of these got under your skin, tell me which one in the comments. And if you want a part 2 covering the ones we skipped, say so, because apparently I now need more of these in my life for reasons I have not examined closely. And if you're new here, please do me a small favor by pressing the subscribe button and turning on notifications so you don't miss the next video. See you in the next video.